Did you know that right now, something is unfolding in the Vatican that could fundamentally transform everything you thought you understood about the Catholic Church? And the most astonishing part? Almost no one outside a tiny circle of insiders has any idea it's even happening. This isn't a headline you'll see splashed across major newspapers, nor is it the subject of sensational documentaries. It's a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, a slow-motion revolution initiated by a man who prefers silence to sermons, humility to grand pronouncements, and mercy as his most potent weapon. 3 months ago, Pope Leo XIV, a figure of increasing intrigue, made a move that sent shockwaves through even the most seasoned Vatican observers. There was no public speech, no carefully orchestrated press conference, no dramatic declaration from the balcony of St. Peter's. He simply acted. And when word of this action began to filter through the ancient corridors and hushed offices of the Holy See, it didn't just ripple. It created seismic tremors that continued to reverberate through the entire Catholic world. But here's the truly shocking twist. That wasn't even his most controversial, or indeed his most profound, decision to date. Look, I understand. When you hear Vatican news, your mind probably conjures images of antiquated rituals, esoteric theological debates, and a cast of elderly men in elaborate robes making decisions that seem utterly detached from the realities of everyday life. You might think, how could any of this possibly affect me? But what if I told you that this Pope, Leo XIV, is meticulously, quietly, and deliberately turning the entire Catholic Church upside down? He's doing it in ways that are so subtle, so profoundly unexpected, that most people are missing it entirely. This isn't your typical religious narrative. It's a story about a leader who is using silence as a weapon against pomp, humility as a strategic blueprint for change, and mercy as the driving force behind a revolution. And by the end of this hour, you will not only understand why what he's doing matters, but why it is perhaps one of the most significant transformations in modern religious history. This isn't just for Catholics or even for Christians. This is for anyone curious about how real, impactful change truly happens in the world, often in the most unexpected corners. So here's where it gets truly interesting. Most Catholics, even those who consider themselves devout and attentive, didn't even notice it at first. There were no blazing headlines screaming about revolutionary changes, no dramatic Vatican announcements accompanied by crowds cheering in St. Peter's Square, no viral social media posts detailing a radical new direction. But if you were paying attention, and I mean really paying attention, with a discerning eye for the quiet shifts that often precede momentous change, you would have seen the signs. They were little things, seemingly insignificant, subtle shifts that simply didn't make sense unless you knew what to look for, unless you understood the deeper current flowing beneath the surface. It started just 19 days into his papacy. 19 days. Most new popes, after the intense, exhausting process of the conclave, spend their entire first month just figuring out where the bathrooms are in the sprawling, labyrinthine Vatican City, let alone establishing new policies. But Leo XIV? He was already, with quiet determination, changing everything, laying the groundwork for his audacious vision. The first whispers of discontent and surprise came from inside the Vatican walls, from the very heart of the institution. Cardinals were seen whispering in hushed corners, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and apprehension. Bishops exchanged worried, uneasy glances across stately halls. Why? Because the new pope had issued a directive that absolutely nobody saw coming. And when I tell you what it was, you are very likely going to think I am making this up, that it's a fictional anecdote designed to shock. His directive was this: every bishop in the world, every single one, regardless of their age, health, or perceived dignity, had to walk barefoot in a public procession at least once a year. Not in some grand, ornate cathedral with its polished marble floors and hushed reverence. Not in the manicured Vatican gardens or on specially prepared ceremonial routes. They had to do it outside, on concrete, on asphalt, on the very same streets where regular people walk every single day. Streets filled with the grime of daily life, with the grit and the noise of the real world. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's weird, certainly unconventional, but it's just symbolic, right? A gesture of humility, perhaps. And to some extent, yes, it is symbolic. But you would be profoundly mistaken if you dismissed it as merely symbolic. This wasn't about symbolism. This was deeply personal. This was about a memory that had scarred this Pope's soul so profoundly, so indelibly, that he was now ensuring every church leader in the world experienced at least a small fraction of the same thing. This wasn't just a directive, it was a deeply felt conviction, an echo from his past, resonating through the present. See, before he was Pope Leo XIV, before he ascended to one of the most powerful positions on earth, he was just Robert Post. He was born in 1955 to a regular family in a regular neighborhood in Chicago. No Vatican connections, no lineage of ecclesiastical grandeur, no fancy religious education from an exclusive seminary. Just a kid who noticed things other people routinely ignored, moments that passed by most unnoticed, yet etched themselves into his consciousness. Like the homeless man, shivering uncontrollably, sleeping under the church steps during a brutal Chicago winter, his breath clouding in the freezing air. Or the elderly mother who lit candles alone, every single day, for a son she'd tragically lost, her grief a silent testament in the flickering flame. Or the quiet, withdrawn kid who sat silent through Mass week after week, his eyes wide but uncomprehending, because nobody had ever bothered to ask if he understood what was happening, if the elaborate rituals meant anything to him. These moments, these tiny, quiet, often overlooked moments that most people would forget almost as soon as they happened, they shaped him. They became part of his very DNA, woven into the fabric of his being. And now, decades later, as the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics, the entire Catholic Church is feeling the profound impact of every single one of those seemingly insignificant encounters. After becoming a priest, Father Robert could have taken the safe, comfortable route. He could have stayed in Chicago, worked his way diligently up the church hierarchy, maybe become a bishop in some comfortable American city, residing in a spacious rectory. That is often the path for ambitious young priests. But that's not what happened to Robert. Instead, he felt an irresistible pull, an urgent need to go where nobody else wanted to go, to serve where the need was greatest and the comforts were fewest. That pull led him far from the familiar cityscape of Chicago, all the way to Peru, to remote, impoverished villages that were so far off the map that most church officials in Rome had never even heard of them, let alone visited. Places where the roads were more like suggestions etched into the landscape than actual paved pathways. And the poverty was so deep, so pervasive, that it literally took your breath away, leaving you gasping for air. And it was there, amidst those towering mountains and dense jungles, that Robert became something more than just a priest. He became a brother to the people he served. He slept where the villagers slept, often on straw mats on dirt floors. He ate what they ate, meager meals shared around a communal fire. And most importantly, he walked where they walked, experiencing their daily struggles firsthand, even when that meant taking off his shoes and walking barefoot through jagged hills and rocky paths just to reach a sick child. Now here's where that childhood memory I mentioned earlier, the one about the man under the church steps, comes into play, crystallizing into a profound moment. Picture this. It's a scorching hot day in a remote Peruvian village. The sun beats down mercilessly, baking the earth. A young boy, no older than 10, comes running frantically into the mission house where Father Robert is staying. The boy is panicked, out of breath, his small chest heaving. He cries out that his sister is gravely sick, maybe dying, and they desperately need help. The local priest, the one usually assigned to that area, is also ill, incapacitated. Nobody else is coming. It's just Robert and this desperate, frightened child. And here's the crucial detail. The boy isn't wearing shoes. Neither is his sister. Neither are most people in the village. They can't afford them. Shoes are a luxury beyond their reach. So Robert looks at this terrified kid, then looks down at his own sturdy sandals and makes a spontaneous, deeply personal decision that will echo through the Vatican and beyond decades later. He takes off his shoes, rolls up the bottom of his simple robes, and walks barefoot behind this boy. They trek through roads covered in jagged pebbles, sharp thorns, and dust so hot it feels like walking on coals. Every step a searing pain. By the time they reach the sick girl, who lies frail and burning with fever in a humble hut, Robert's feet are bleeding, raw and blistered. His legs are cramped, his body exhausted, but he has arrived. And when he arrives, something truly magical happens. The villagers, witnessing his sacrifice, don't kneel before him like he's some important religious figure, some distant, revered authority. Instead, one elderly woman, her face wrinkled with age and wisdom, simply takes his bleeding hand and says, her voice filled with quiet awe, "Now we believe you. You came like us." That moment seared into his soul, changed everything for him. He realized that all his fancy theological education, all his years of study, all his impressive titles meant absolutely nothing if people couldn't see that he was with them, truly with them, not above them. He understood that true leadership isn't about elevation. It's about identification, about sharing the burdens, about walking in someone else's pain. Fast forward to today. Pope Leo XIV, now at the pinnacle of Catholic leadership, remembered that searing moment, that transformative walk, and he decided, with unwavering conviction, that every bishop in the world needed to have their own version of it, their own tangible experience of identification with the suffering. That's why the barefoot mandate wasn't just eccentric, it was explosive, because it fundamentally challenged something at the very core of how the Church operates, how its leaders perceive themselves and are perceived by others. It was a direct assault on the traditional trappings of power and privilege. But the barefoot thing was just the beginning, a shocking opening salvo. What Pope Leo did next was so unprecedented, so utterly unconventional, that even I had to read about it twice, perhaps 3 times, to truly believe it, to fully grasp its audaciousness. The Vatican gardens, right? Those pristine, perfectly manicured, utterly exclusive gardens nestled behind centuries-old walls. A verdant sanctuary that only the most important people in the world, heads of state, visiting dignitaries, high-ranking cardinals, get to see, get to walk in, get to pray in. Gardens where popes throughout history have walked and prayed, where diplomats have conducted secret, sensitive conversations, where every flower is meticulously tended, every path pristine, every corner beautiful and untouchable, completely off-limits to regular people, to the teeming masses outside the walls. Well, Pope Leo XIV, in an act of breathtaking radicalism, opened them up. But not to tourists, not to VIPs, not to wealthy donors. He opened them to the homeless. Every single evening, a small, carefully selected group of people. People who sleep under bridges, in forgotten alleyways. People that most of society pretends don't exist, often stepping around them with averted eyes. They get brought into these sacred, exclusive gardens. They are offered warm food, freshly prepared. They receive clean blankets, soft and comforting. And perhaps most precious of all, they are given something even more vital than sustenance: dignity. There are no cameras allowed, no intrusive paparazzi, No volunteers taking selfies for Instagram to prove their virtue. No press releases about how charitable the church is being. No public commendations, just quiet, unassuming mercy, happening under the stars, within what might just be the most exclusive, guarded piece of real estate in the entire world. It is an act of pure, unadulterated compassion, enacted without fanfare. When some Vatican officials, aghast and uncomfortable, complained that this might damage the image of the gardens, sully their pristine nature, Pope Leo's response was, in its sublime simplicity, absolutely perfect. He looked them directly in the eye and said, "The only image I care about is Christ," and he had nowhere to lay his head. Think about that for a second. Let the profound implications of that statement sink in. For centuries, the Church has talked about serving the poor, preached about charity, exhorted its faithful to give alms. But how often has it actually invited the poor, the marginalized, the inconvenient, into its most sacred spaces, into the very heart of its institutional being? How often has it treated them not as charity cases, objects of pity to be helped from a distance, but as family, as equals, as beloved children of God? This wasn't just a nice gesture, a fleeting act of goodwill. This was a thunderous statement. It was a declaration that the Church isn't a museum for saints, a repository of relics and traditions, but a hospital for sinners, for the broken, for the lost. And hospitals, true hospitals, don't turn people away because they're too messy, too broken, too inconvenient, or too difficult to deal with. They embrace them. Now, if you've been paying even casual attention to Pope Leo XIV's public appearances, to the images that circulate, you've probably noticed something else that's distinctly different, something subtle yet incredibly powerful. Look at what he's wearing. Gone are the elaborate robes, dripping with gold thread, shimmering with intricate embroidery. Gone are the ornate, heavy vestments that look like they belong in a royal court, designed to impress and awe. Instead, you see simple white cassocks, perhaps a small, unadorned wooden cross around his neck, and plain mitres when he has to wear them at all. To some, this might appear to be nothing more than a practical measure, a pragmatic decision to cut back on the Church's opulent fashion budget in leaner times. But this is actually one of the loudest, most resonant messages he has ever sent. Because Leo XIV isn't just dressing differently. He's actively, deliberately redefining what authority looks like, what it means to lead. In a world where religious leaders often look more like CEOs of multinational corporations than humble shepherds, Pope Leo is asking a radical, almost subversive question. What if the people don't need us to look impressive, distant, or unapproachable? What if, instead, they desperately need us to look approachable, relatable, human? He's been quoted as saying privately to his closest advisors, "People are hungry for truth, not fabric." And that profound line is already reshaping how Catholics around the world perceive their church leaders, encouraging them to look beyond the external trappings. During one major feast day, a solemn and significant occasion in the liturgical calendar, he showed up wearing just a basic white robe and a simple stole, starkly contrasted with the elaborate regalia usually expected. When someone, a well-meaning but perhaps slightly bewildered cardinal, asked why he chose such simplicity for such an important, grand event, his response was, once again, perfect, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "I don't need gold to carry grace." This visual humility is already beginning to spread, a quiet contagion of simplicity. Some cardinals and bishops, inspired by his example, are slowly but surely following his lead, choosing simpler vestments and plainer jewelry. Others are visibly resisting, worried that too much simplicity might somehow make the Church look less majestic, less divine, less awe-inspiring. But the shift has undeniably begun, and it's not happening because of new rules or regulations. It's happening because of the powerful, quiet force of example, a testament to the power of a single vision. But Pope Leo XIV didn't stop with mere visual changes. He's also quietly, deliberately, and strategically revolutionizing something even more fundamental, something that touches the very core of how faith is expressed: the language of worship itself. It started small, almost imperceptibly small. A traditional prayer that used to say brothers now says brothers and sisters. Scripture readings that used to say mankind now, subtly but powerfully, say humankind. These are tiny, seemingly insignificant changes that most people didn't even notice at first glance, perhaps dismissing them as mere modernizations. But the ripple effects have been immense, profound, and far-reaching. Because language isn't just about accuracy. It's about presence, about inclusion, about who is seen and who is invisible. If you sit in church your whole life and never hear yourself addressed directly, never hear your own experience reflected in the words of prayer, how long before you start wondering if you were ever truly meant to be there? If you truly belong? This radical inclusivity, this deliberate shift in language, comes from yet another one of those defining moments in Peru, a moment that resonated deeply within the young priest. There was an old woman in one of the remote villages, nearly blind, frail but fiercely devoted, who came to every Mass week after week. But she never spoke during the service, never joined in the communal responses, remaining silent, almost a phantom presence. One Sunday, Father Robert, guided by an intuition he couldn't explain, read a prayer differently than he ever had before. Instead of using the formal, traditional, somewhat archaic language of the liturgy, he addressed the congregation more intimately, more personally. He referred to them as family of God, brothers and sisters, children of every tongue and tribe. After Mass, as the small congregation dispersed, that old woman, her eyes clouded by age, stood up, reached out, and slowly, deliberately took his hand. She leaned in close and whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with emotion, "Today, I heard my name." She didn't mean her literal name, of course. She meant she felt seen, truly included, like she belonged for the very first time in her long life. The formal, distant language of the church had always felt like a cold, impenetrable wall to her. But in that moment, the language felt like a warm, tender embrace, a welcoming presence. That moment never left him, cementing his belief in the power of inclusive language. And now, as Pope, he's making sure countless others feel the same profound sense of belonging. Here's where Pope Leo XIV's vision gets even more interesting, encompassing not just human interaction, but the very environment we inhabit. He's not just changing how the church talks and looks. He's changing how it fundamentally treats the planet itself. The Green Vatican initiative might sound like typical environmental PR, a superficial attempt to appear modern and responsible, but it's actually much deeper, much more profoundly rooted in his core convictions. By 2030, Pope Leo XIV wants the entire Vatican city-state to be completely carbon neutral. This isn't just a lofty goal. It's a meticulously planned undertaking. Solar panels on historic buildings, carefully integrated into the ancient architecture. Sophisticated composting systems for all food waste, diverting it from landfills. Electric vehicles replacing gas-powered ones for official Vatican transport. Native trees, carefully selected, planted throughout the hallowed grounds, enhancing biodiversity and beauty. But this isn't about jumping on some trendy environmental bandwagon, chasing fleeting popular opinion. This goes back to that same acute sensitivity to suffering, that profound empathy that shaped him as a young priest. In 1992, decades before his papacy, he revisited a remote village in Peru that he'd been to before, a place he held dear. But this time, something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. The dense, protective trees that had once surrounded the village were gone, mercilessly cut down and burned by illegal loggers. The air was thick and acrid with smoke, hanging heavy and suffocating. Children, their small lungs struggling, were coughing incessantly by the riverside. One little girl, perhaps no older than 10, held a piece of ragged cloth over her mouth, her eyes wide with a deep, unsettling sadness. She looked at him and whispered, her voice barely audible, "We can't pray under the trees anymore, Father. They're all gone." That poignant image, that innocent lament, haunted him for years, because in that moment, he realized that you cannot effectively preach care for the human soul while simultaneously ignoring the sacred home that holds it. Environmental destruction isn't just a political issue. It's a profound spiritual one, a moral failing. The earth, with all its breathtaking beauty and fragile ecosystems, is God's precious gift to humanity, and we have an undeniable, sacred responsibility to protect it, to be its stewards. But perhaps the most revolutionary thing Pope Leo XIV is doing, the action that most directly challenges centuries of entrenched Vatican tradition, is this. He's actively, deliberately, and systematically giving power away. For hundreds of years, the Vatican has operated like a spiritual empire, a highly centralized authority. Every decision, no matter how small or localized, had to be approved by Rome, a vast, often slow-moving bureaucracy. Local churches, despite their unique cultural contexts and community needs, had to wait for instructions, for explicit permission, before they could adapt their worship, their pastoral practices, to fit their specific communities and cultures. Pope Leo XIV looked at that rigid, top-heavy system and, with quiet determination, rewrote the rules. Now, local bishops have newfound, unprecedented authority to make their own decisions about liturgy, pastoral practices, and cultural adaptations, responding directly to the needs of their flocks. Local churches can finally speak their own spiritual language again, breathing new life into ancient traditions, without waiting for permission from thousands of miles away, from a distant, sometimes uncomprehending authority. Even more shocking, in an unprecedented move, he's created global youth councils, giving teenagers and young adults direct, tangible influence in Vatican decision-making. These are not token positions for photo opportunities or ceremonial gestures. These are real opportunities for young people to shape the future direction of the Church. When skeptical cardinals, steeped in centuries of tradition, worried openly that young people might ask for too much change, too fast, disrupting the delicate balance, Pope Leo XIV reminded them, with a quiet but firm voice, "When the young speak with fire, it's not because they are reckless. It's because the Spirit still burns brightly in them. Our job isn't to put out that flame, to extinguish their passion, but to tend it, to nurture it, to guide it gently like a precious beacon." So what's truly happening here? What is Pope Leo XIV actually trying to achieve with this quiet, profound revolution? Here's what I believe. He's not trying to destroy the Catholic Church or abandon its sacred traditions. Quite the opposite. He's trying, desperately, to save it, to remind the world, and indeed the Church itself, of its foundational purpose. He's trying to remind everyone that Christianity was never supposed to be about power, about prestige, about performance, about grand displays of authority. It was always supposed to be about love, about profound mercy, about walking with people shoulder to shoulder, not ruling over them from a distant, elevated throne. Every single change he's making, from the controversial barefoot bishops to the homeless invited into the sacred gardens, to the deliberate choice of simple robes, sends the exact same crystal-clear message. We are not above you. We are with you. We are one. And just maybe, that's exactly what the world needs right now, in its fractured, cynical state. Not more religious leaders who look like kings, detached from the struggles of the common person, but more who look like humble servants, grounded in reality. Not more institutions that relentlessly protect their own image, their own power, but more that genuinely protect the vulnerable, the forgotten, the unseen. Not more voices shouting from grand balconies, proclaiming their authority, but more people willing to kneel in the dust, to get their hands dirty, and to whisper with genuine empathy, "I see you. You matter. You belong. Come home." Whether you're Catholic, Christian, or just someone watching from the outside, an observer of the human condition, Pope Leo XIV's quiet revolution has something profoundly important to teach all of us about what real leadership looks like, what true influence entails. It's not always about being the loudest voice in the room, commanding attention. Sometimes it's about being the one who truly listens, who hears the silent cries of the marginalized. Sometimes it's about courageously taking off your shoes, shedding the symbols of power and privilege. Sometimes it's about opening your gates, inviting the excluded into your most sacred spaces. And sometimes, most powerfully, it's about remembering that the most profound, most transformative thing you can say to someone isn't "follow me," demanding allegiance. It's "come home," offering belonging. And in an increasingly fractured world, that offer might just be the most revolutionary message of all.